Each year in the United States, nearly 400 million pounds of potatoes are thrown out due to bruising. Food waste is a modern problem. From mass production to shipping, our food goes through a lot before it reaches our plates. During shipping, potatoes get bruised and develop mushy, black spots that either have to be cut out of the potato or render the entire potato inedible. As the potato capital of the world, Idaho is no stranger to the issues surrounding the shipping of potatoes, but one company has a unique solution, editing the genes of potatoes and making them genetically less susceptible to bruising. This Idaho-based company has been around for decades and has had a lasting impact on the Boise community, but hardly anyone knows who they are or what they do. As one of the largest privately owned food corporations in the world, this company invented the frozen French fry and dehydrated vegetables, set the current standards for ranching, and made Idaho famous for potatoes. The company in question? Simplot. My name is Andrea Hagge, and today we'll be taking a look at the power of a potato. If you've grown up in Idaho, Simplot is probably a familiar name. You may have seen it on one of the buildings on the BSU campus, or recognize that they built the Jump building downtown. Or maybe you've seen them as a sponsor for a local sports team, but if you haven't lived here long, chances are you haven't heard of them. This brings us to Chapter 1, the history of the spud. JR Simplot, founder of the company, changed the face of Idaho forever. At the age of just 15, Jack Richard Simplot dropped out of school and purchased 600 hogs. In order to make his first paycheck over the cold Idaho winter of 1924, he fed the hogs meat from wild horses he shot and sold their hides at $2 apiece. When spring came and he sold the hogs, he became $7,500 richer, around $120,000 in today's market. With that money, Simplot purchased his own land and quickly became a self-taught potato farmer. When he and one of his neighbors invested in an electric potato sorter, Simplot eventually won full ownership of the machine on a coin flip, sold his land, and traveled rural Idaho sorting potatoes for other farmers, all before the age of 25. During World War II, Simplot made even more fortune as the largest producer of dehydrated vegetables for American troops. In the 50s, Simplot began selling frozen potatoes to the new fast food industry, which would become the French fries we know and love today. In the 70s, Simplot began to invest in alternative energy, becoming one of the largest ethanol producers in the country. Today, Simplot still remains a very successful company. As the times changed, so did Simplot's business model, adapting to issues and investing in new technology. Even after the death of JR Simplot, his company still thrives, but has now moved on to a new era of food production, one where humans can edit the individual genes in plants. This brings us to Chapter 2, Frankenstein's potato. On the outside, the Simplot produced innate potato is like any other potato. It's the same size as any other potato and shares the same physical features. It has the size, shape, and feel of any russet potato. The inside is the same, a pale beige, and it tastes, undoubtedly, like a potato. But on a genetic level, this potato couldn't be more different. The Simplot innate potato contains genetic materials that come mostly from an average russet potato, but that also contain select genes from wild potatoes. This process was done by a method called gene splicing, which was done by a similar means to editing film. Just like movies are made up of hundreds of pictures, all organisms have a genetic code called DNA. When you run the pictures one after another, you get a movie, but with genetic code, you get organisms, everything from plants to animals to bacteria. If you want to change one of the scenes in a movie, you cut out the pictures of film that correspond to that scene and tape over the new scene. This process is surprisingly similar to how scientists at Simplot created the innate potato. With DNA acting like film, scientists use a restriction enzyme to cut out the desired portion of DNA from a wild potato, which is like the replacement scene. They then take a domestic potato breed, such as a russet potato, and use a restriction enzyme to cut out the corresponding sequence of DNA. In the final step, scientists use ligase like a tape to put the section of wild potato DNA into the missing section of russet DNA, leaving us with the end product of altered potato DNA. Using this modified DNA, cells can be cultivated and grown into potato plants that function differently than unmodified plants do. There are many genes that are present in an innate potato, each of which gene splicing is done. Using this modified DNA, cells can be cultivated and grown into adult potato plants that function differently than unmodified plants do. There are many genes that are present in the innate potato, and each time gene splicing is done, the outcome is a little bit different, so getting each gene to display right was a challenge. In the first generation innate potatoes, genes were added to make these potatoes 44% less susceptible to bruising than regular potatoes. Annually, this saves $90 million in consumer costs, cuts potato CO2 emissions down by 60 million pounds, saves 6.7 billion gallons of water, and stops 170,000 acres from being sprayed with pesticides, all of which has a massive impact on how we will produce food as a society. With the current climate crisis, this company has taken a step to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly, something few companies have taken such action on. On a broader scale, the technology behind the innate potato could have a global impact, which leads us to Chapter 3, Tuber Takeover. In many third world countries, potato virus Y is a devastating and common disease. When infected, plants with the disease die off. Because the virus makes leaves of plants develop yellow spots, they can't perform photosynthesis efficiently. The potatoes don't grow as large and end up covered in necrotic ring spots, which makes the potato inedible. This disease also affects certain tobacco, tomato, and pepper species, each in a similar way. In countries that depend on a constant crop yield, communities impacted by this disease often experience famine afterward. In a study done by the University of Mosul in Iraq, it was found that crop yield from infected plants could decrease anywhere from 10 to 100%. Simplot's Gen 2 innate potato is resistant to a strain of potato virus Y known as late blight, the same disease responsible for the Irish potato famine. Using the same technology to create the innate potato, scientists could make resistant strains of potatoes, tobacco, tomatoes, peppers, and many other food crops. This could help solve the hunger crisis in third world countries, as well as the technology behind the innate potato makes plants yield more produce, reduces the amount of water necessary for irrigation, and can make plants immune to devastating diseases. The potential is there. Now people must create a demand. In a world where altering the genetics of plants we eat is possible, it's normal for people to be worried about the safety of foods we eat. But as more and more genetically modified produce hits the market, the more normalized it seems. In a study published in Nutrition and Food Science, it was found that students at a Canadian university had a negative view of GMOs. However, this study was done in Canada, where GMOs are much more heavily regulated than in the US, so I conducted my own survey that consisted of a random sample of 55 BSU students. When asked to rate their confidence level on their knowledge of GMOs, the majority of these students labeled themselves as a 4 out of 6, while the next most popular response was a 1 out of 6. There was no trend in my survey between having a food or biology-based major and having more knowledge about GMOs. The majority of respondents said that they didn't care about GMOs, and it seems that GMOs have become a very normal part of life for college-aged people. In today's podcast, we learned all about the history of JR Simplot in the chapter The History of the Spud. Then we took a closer look at the science behind GMOs in Chapter 2, Frankenstein's Potato. And finally, we looked at the global impacts on the third world countries and the attitudes people have towards GMOs in Tuber Takeover. As Ian Malcolm said in Jurassic Park, "Don't you see the danger inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you yield it like a kid who's found his dad's gun." In a world where humans can now mess with the extraordinary power of genetics, things for good are possible, but so is the capacity for evil. Eating is a massive part of all of our lives, and now that our food is changing, with that change comes new responsibility. This revolutionary new way of improving food does so without using chemicals or relying on expensive machinery, and is a concrete solution to an ever-looming problem. And this was all born right here in Boise, Idaho. Change is inevitable, but who knew the power of a potato? I'd like to take this time now to thank my sources and all the respondents to my survey. Until next time, this is Andrea Hagge, signing out.